Whatever it was trying its very best to strike the fear of God into the Gooding family, and it was having great success. Marcia just froze, sat there on the carpet like a statue, too afraid to move. She was used to these noises by now, but this was the first time she'd really seen fear in her parents' eyes. And then, once again, the banging just stopped, leaving the room in total silence. But don't be fooled, this wasn't the peaceful, ambient sort of silence. No, this was the eerie, ominous, calm before the storm sort of silence. They all went to bed that night feeling unsettled, hoping that somehow tomorrow would be easier. Spoiler alert, it wouldn't. The Goodins spent most of the day out visiting family and going to mass. Anything to keep them away from that house, but at the same time dreading what would be awaiting them when they returned home. Marcia fell asleep in the car on the way back home, and they returned home at around 4:30 p.m, so it wasn't really late. They pulled up outside the house. Jerry got out of the car, walked around to Marcia's side and opened the door. Carefully he pulled her out trying not to wake her and carried her to her room so she could carry on napping for a while. That's when he noticed something really odd. The TV in Marcia's room, which was usually positioned up high on a shelf, was now lying face down on her bed. It most certainly hadn't been like that when they left the house earlier that day. He gently laid Marcia down, put the TV back in place and walked into the kitchen to tell Laura. But as he stepped into the kitchen, he saw something that chilled him to his core. He stopped, held out his finger and pointed over towards the kitchen sink. Laura, who was looking in Jerry's direction at this point, followed his gaze over to the sink. There, before their very eyes, plates, dishes and cups were floating up out of the sink. They paused mid-air for a second before they launched across the kitchen, exploding against the walls like something out of Poltergeist. Laura let out a blood-curdling scream. Jerry dropped to the floor to pick up the shards when, without warning, the entire knife block flew across the room, barely missing him by inches. They both backed into the kitchen doorway, just completely stunned, watching and waiting for whatever might happen next. But, again, they were met with momentary silence. It was like the entity was lulling them into a false sense of security. After a minute or two, they cautiously began cleaning up, believing that the activity was over for now. Jerry headed back to the car to grab the rest of the groceries. It was almost like the spirit waited for his back to be turned before it struck again. Laura was still tidying up the mess when she saw movement out of the corner of her eye. She turned to face the movement. The kitchen table slowly began to rise off the ground, and then it flipped over, completely sending the groceries flying. Food and drink items came pouring out of the bags onto the floor. A milk carton exploded on impact, creating yet more carnage, more mess for the Goodins to clear up. Then the table came crashing back down on top of the chairs. But the poltergeist wasn't finished. I think we can safely call it a poltergeist at this point. Before Laura could have any time to process what she'd just seen, the refrigerator, yes, the actual fridge, lifted about 6 inches off the floor, rotated slightly to the right and set itself back down. Laura stepped away and screamed at the top of her voice for Jerry, who was still outside at this point. And now she was standing right in front of the large TV in the kitchen. It tipped and it flipped, hurtling to the ground and slamming down onto poor Laura's foot in the process. Now remember, this was the 1970s. They didn't have paper-thin flat-screen TVs back then. These things were huge blocks and they were fucking heavy. 2 of Laura's toes shattered instantly on impact. Jerry ran back inside the house to the sound of Laura screaming. He just couldn't believe what he was seeing. What the hell was going on in their house? He lifted the TV off Laura's foot and bandaged her up, trying to stay as calm as possible, which was proving difficult under the circumstances. Laura began to sob. The activity was becoming unbearable now. She had no idea why this was happening to her family and how far it would go. Well, let's just say she would soon get her answers. Later that evening, Jerry was sitting in the living room watching TV. He picked up the remote to change channel, and almost simultaneously, as he pressed the button, the lights in the kitchen flicked on by itself. Jerry gulped. here we go again, he whispered to himself. Jerry walked into the kitchen on his own to switch off the light. Before he flicked the switch, he got that feeling. The hairs on the back of his neck and his arms stood on end. He couldn't see it, but he knew it was there, watching him, studying him. He glanced across the room and his eyes landed on the kitchen table. He watched as it started to shift, very slowly at first, and then it slid a foot or so in Jerry's direction. He froze at first, anticipating its next move. Then he quickly flicked off the light and walked very calmly back to the living room, trying his absolute best to act like nothing had happened. And for a little while, things seemed to settle down. The rest of the evening remained quiet, too quiet, almost peaceful. But that doesn't mean the Goodins were able to relax. Eventually, they all retreated to their bedrooms and got ready to turn in for the night. Jerry was in his bathroom having a wash at the sink when he heard a shrill scream come from the other side of the house. It was Marcia, and something was seriously wrong. Jerry dropped his towel to the floor and bolted straight to Marcia's bedroom. A few minutes earlier, Marcia had been arranging her cuddly toys on her bed as she always did before she went to sleep, and started reciting her prayers. She climbed onto her bed and pulled the blanket back, ready to lie down and switch off her nightlamp. But as she reached for the switch, she felt a searing pain coming from her ankle. The TV, the same one that had fallen the day before, had landed right on her foot. She was in agony, absolutely sobbing her heart out, not to mention terrified. Yet again, the poltergeist that was haunting their house was showing that it was more than capable and willing to cause them considerable harm. That was it, the final straw. The Goodins were at the end of their tether. After this incident, the family decided to stay up later that night, sitting in the living room together with the TV on, not really sure what else to do. A little bit later, Marcia said she needed the bathroom. She'd been brave all day. Even after what had just happened in her bedroom, she insisted on going to the bathroom alone. Jerry and Laura let her go, but they didn't stop listening. Now I'm sorry, but as her father, I would at least insist at the bare minimum that her mother go and wait outside the bathroom door for her. I mean, she got lucky with the TV on her ankle. That could have been so much worse. This poltergeist was obviously willing to hurt her. Any of them for that matter. So, you might not be surprised when I tell you that just seconds after Marcia had disappeared into the bathroom, there was yet another scream as the bathroom door slammed shut behind her. They bolted down the hall and barged the door open. The bathroom was completely trashed. Marcia had been in there less than a minute and the scene was complete carnage. There were toiletries all over the place, tissue paper strewn all over the floor, the taps and the shower were on full blast, and the shower curtain rod had come loose and crashed down hard, missing Marcia's head by inches. She stood there in the wreckage, crying her eyes out, just completely distraught. Within the space of just a few days, the activity had gone from inconvenient, unsettling at most, but now it was dangerous. It was sinister. It wanted to cause them harm, and the focus of the activity seemed to be aimed at Marcia. Laura felt truly heartbroken. She had pulled Marcia out of one hellhole and landed her in a different one entirely. The very next morning, Jerry woke up, rubbing his eyes and yawning as he strolled sleepily into the kitchen to grab a morning coffee. He stopped, dead on the spot, as soon as he set foot in the kitchen. The place was an absolute wreck. The table had been flipped over again, and the refrigerator had been dragged across the floor, not just slightly this time. It had been dragged right across the room, blocking the back door entirely. And yet, the Goodins hadn't heard a thing all night. Shaken, he went to the family bathroom to talk to Laura, who was in the middle of having a wash. And that's when a crucifix and a picture of Jesus, both nailed securely to the wall, ripped free and crashed to the floor right in front of him. Before he could even process what was going on, there was yet another crash, this time once again coming from Marcia's room. He sprinted in to find that her wooden cupboard with all her clothes had been toppled onto her bed, missing her by inches as she slept. I mean, this was a heavy piece of furniture and could easily have caused considerable harm. The crashes and bangs rolled through the house like thunder. The Goodins followed the sound to the living room, and the scene that awaited them when they reached the living room, well, let's just say it looked like something straight out of The Exorcist. All 3 recliner chairs were moving, sliding around the room independently. At moments, they weren't just moving, they were lifting off the ground completely. Eventually, the recliners rested still on the ground, but the poltergeist hadn't finished yet. The brief moment's silence was interrupted by the sound of the television turning itself on. The sound of static boomed from the speaker as the screen lit up with that eerie white and black fuzzy display. But underneath the static was the sound of something stranger and creepier still. The distorted sound of a doorbell ringing again and again and again. It was reminiscent of a horror film, only this wasn't a horror film, this was real life, and it was happening to them. Laura panicked. Not knowing what else to do, she picked up the phone and called their friends, the Hoffmans, sobbing down the line. The family grabbed their coats and boots. Then Jerry ushered Laura and Marcia out to the porch while they waited. As they stood outside shivering in the cold, they spotted Janet Holsworth, daughter of Officer John Holsworth, who was walking their Labrador down the street. Jerry was about to call out to Janet when Laura screamed. So just outside on the porch, the Goodins had a green sofa, where they would often spend family time together on warmer nights. That sofa was hovering at least a foot in the air. For a moment it just kinda hung there like the poltergeist was putting on a show for all to see. Then it slammed back down to the ground with a violent thud that rattled the entire porch. With panic in his voice and quickly running out of ideas, Jerry yelled for Janet to go and fetch her father. Within just minutes, Officer John Holsworth was on the porch with the family. Jerry, almost choking on his words, blurted out, "There's some kind of evil force wrecking our home." Holsworth told the family to wait outside. With a cigarette already lit hanging out of his mouth, he stepped inside 966 Lindley Street, and within just seconds he came running back out with a pale face. You could say he looked like he'd seen a ghost. "What the hell happened here?" Holsworth stuttered, struggling to catch his breath. The living room was a disaster. Furniture overturned, plates and dishes smashed. Every single room in the house looked like a hurricane had hit it. Holsworth had been called out to some pretty chaotic scenes. Break-ins, burglaries, home invasions, you name it. But he'd never seen anything like this before. This was something else entirely. Holsworth, who, as part of his job, had a keen eye for detail, turned just in time to notice that the TV he had walked past just a few seconds ago was now sitting at a completely different angle. He checked the TV and found nothing to explain how it had suddenly changed position. Then, just as he turned away, the TV shifted itself back to its original position. So now, John Holsworth, a local police officer, was witnessing the poltergeist activity at the Goodins' house for himself. But that was nothing compared to what happened when they entered the kitchen. The refrigerator, this time with witnesses, jumped nearly 2 feet off the ground and slammed into Officer Holsworth, with enough force to cause bruising to his arm. By now, Harold Hoffman had arrived too, and his wife had already called the police. At around 10 a.m, officers Carl Leonzi and Joe Tomek arrived at 966 Lindley Street. They found Laura sitting on the step outside the porch with her head tucked into her knees, tears streaming down her cheeks. Marcia, on the other hand, was sitting in the living room watching cartoons, as if nothing had happened at all. Hang on. Please tell me they hadn't left that little girl alone in that house with a bloodthirsty poltergeist. I mean, it's not as if it hadn't already tried to cause her serious harm. At first, the officers assumed that there had been a burglary, but Jerry and Laura quickly filled the officers in on exactly what had been going on at their house. Officer Tomek, sceptical but curious, picked up one of the fallen televisions and placed it back on its stand. Not even 1 minute later, he turned to see it face down on the floor again. Perplexed, he walked back over and picked the TV up and placed it back on the stand, But this time, he stood and watched. The TV lifted itself off the stand right in front of his very eyes, and it hung there in the air just motionless for a few seconds. Tomek walked up to it and studied it thoroughly, searching for wires, strings, anything that could explain what he'd just seen, but there was absolutely nothing. And then, right in front of him, the TV began to swing, side to side, slowly, as if it was being suspended on ropes. But obviously it wasn't. Then it turned, rotated, and gently lowered itself back into place. And that was it. That was the breaking point. Officer Tomek grabbed his radio. His voice was shaking, a concoction of fear and disbelief.
"We're gonna need backup immediately."
Before long, officers George Wilson and Leroy Lawson arrived at the house. Officer Tomek tried to explain to the other officers what he'd just seen without sounding like an absolute fruitcake. But it wouldn't take long for the poltergeist to give these other officers a paranormal demonstration. As the four men stood in the kitchen, the fridge, which was directly behind Tomek, started to move. It lifted itself 6 inches off the ground, floated there for a second, and then, slowly and silently, lowered itself back down. To the officers, this was like nothing they'd ever seen before. How could this even be real? But to the Goodins, this had suddenly become a very real part of their everyday life. Jerry and Laura stood off to the side, terrified, distraught, just mentally exhausted. Their house, their entire lives for that matter, was being gradually torn apart. And Marcia? Officer Tomek would say that she showed absolutely no emotion at all. She just sat there, kind of blank, accustomed to it all. Officer Tomek called for an ambulance. Laura's injured foot needed medical attention, and he also called for a fire crew to inspect the building. He hung up the phone, but before he could even breathe, another loud crash was heard, and it sounded like it was coming from Marcia's bedroom. Officers Tomek, Wilson and Lawson headed into the bedroom to investigate. They opened the door, only to see that another piece of heavy furniture had been tipped over, and absolutely nobody had been in that room. In a state of utter disbelief, the officers backed out of the room into the hallway. A golden crucifix that was fixed to the wall ripped itself from the wall and struck Officer Lawson square in the centre of his chest. And that was it for him. He had seen more than enough. He'd never witnessed anything like this before. He was terrified. The young cop muttered something like, "Fuck this, I'm out. I'm a police officer, not a ghostbuster." He walked straight out of the house to his patrol car, climbed in, and locked the doors. Within just minutes, 3 fire units rolled up, 10 men in total. The small bungalow was now full of uniforms and boots, radios crackling, everyone craning their necks to see. 966 Lindley Street had become a freak show. Assistant Fire Chief Paul McKenna told the family that they were welcome to stay at a Red Cross shelter for the rest of the night. But Laura politely declined and insisted they'd be okay to stay with relatives. The firemen didn't have to wait long for the freak show to start performing for them. Another TV tipped itself face down onto the floor, with more and more eyes bearing witness. Outside the house, word was spreading fast, and an audience was starting to gather outside. Neighbours, onlookers, reporters, a small crowd of spectators had gathered on the lawn, trying to get a glimpse into the house, which was full to the brim with cops and firemen. Deputy Fire Chief Whelan picked up the phone and called the station chaplain, Father Doyle. He started by assuring him that he wasn't drunk or under the influence of any substances. Then he proceeded to explain exactly what was happening at that house, or at least try to. Back inside the house, Marcia was sat in the living room on one of the recliners. Dozens of adults standing around her, all trying to come up with their own logical explanations for what was happening. Then the room fell completely silent, and all eyes turned to Marcia. Suddenly, the recliner that she was sitting in started going absolutely berserk, snapping from upright to reclined and back again, over and over again, violently, shaking her like a rag doll, until she leapt out of the chair screaming. Laura, sobbing, cried out to no one in particular, "Evil spirits are trying to kill my family." And the room, full of police, firemen, neighbours, and a terrified little girl, fell completely silent. And that's where we'll leave part 2. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like and subscribe and keep an eye out for part 3, which will be coming soon. Thanks for watching. I'm your host, Severed Soul.